This is a Fox News Alert. I'm Bret Baier in Washington. We begin tonight with breaking news of a shooting at the YouTube headquarters in San Bruno, California. We now know from police 3 people are hurt and 1, a female shooter, is dead. Police say likely from a self-inflicted gunshot. Let's get more now on the breaking news from correspondent Trace Gallagher in Los Angeles. Good evening, Trace.
Good evening, Bret. Just for perspective, San Bruno sits right between San Francisco's International Airport and the actual city of San Francisco. And at 12:46 this afternoon, West Coast time, 911 began getting dozens of calls, more than 50 by some estimates. Police say they were on the scene 2 minutes later. At that point, the 1,700 plus employees began flooding out of the building, and that's when police went in. The police chief picks it up from there. Watch.
Officers encountered numerous employees fleeing from the building. It was very chaotic, as you can imagine. While conducting a search of the premises, officers located a second individual with a gunshot wound that appears to may have been self-inflicted. We are still working on confirming that.
Yeah, police have confirmed the shooter was a female, and they believe this was domestic violence and that she was targeting a male. We do know that one male is now in critical condition after being shot. It is unclear if the person who is critical is the same person that she may have been targeting. And there was all kinds of speculation that the shooting began outside and then moved inside. What we do know is that police, in searching the building, found the shooter and the victim together in one room. Both of them were suffering gunshot wounds. There are 3 other victims with what police are now calling gunshot-related injuries. One of them is serious. The other 2, we're told, is non-life-threatening. Now, in the early going, there was questions about whether the shooter did make it into the building. Now we know that answer, especially after one of the victims ran into a nearby Carl's Jr. restaurant with a shooting wound. Watch.
A lady had come out of the YouTube building, actually limped or came into Carl's Jr., had a gunshot in her foot. That's right about, I mean, there were barely any police there at the time. And then also next, from all directions, police, not slowly, but started coming. And you knew something was serious because people started crowding around. Police started coming from every direction.
Yeah, and consider the enormous task. This is a 200,000 square foot building, YouTube's primary headquarters. Police were in that building going room to room. There was talk of a second shooter, and police have not confirmed that. Nobody else was involved, but at this point, they believe this was the work of one shooter, a female shooter. We should note the president has tweeted on this, and I'm quoting here, "We just briefed on the shooting at YouTube's headquarters in San Bruno, California. Our thoughts and prayers are with everybody involved. Thank you to our phenomenal law enforcement officers and first responders that are on scene right now." And you'll recall it was just a couple of weeks ago, Bret, that YouTube banned firearm sales and how-to gun videos on YouTube. Remember, this has parallels. A female shooter is very, very rare. It draws parallels, and we're told this was a Google party happening at the time. It draws parallels to the San Bernardino shooting where 2 people went in during that Christmas party and opened fire. That was terrorism. This, at this point, appears to be domestic violence. Bret.
Yeah, Trace, you said it was a Google party at the time. We're hearing from some of those eyewitnesses that there was some sort of back porch area where people go out for lunch and that perhaps this shooter didn't really make it all the way into the building itself.
Well, police did say that she was found inside a room, so she did make it into the building at one point in time, which is not to discount the witnesses, because it's very possible that she began shooting on the outside and made her way inside, because, remember, we have 4 victims now, gunshot-related wounds, so it's very possible that the gunfire began outside and that she apparently at one point in time made her way inside. But it's our understanding that she was found with the most seriously injured of the victims inside a room, meaning that she did make it in. But the person who was shot in the leg and went to Carl's Jr., what's unclear is whether she was actually inside the building and ran into the parking lot and then into the Carl's for treatment, or whether she was in the parking lot when she encountered the shooter and was shot there. Still some details we're looking for clarification on, Bret.
All right, we'll head back for any details on that. Trace, thanks. Let's get some insight quickly about how law enforcement is operating here. John Iannarelli is a former special agent with the FBI. He's in Phoenix tonight. tonight. Thanks for being here. I guess first I want to ask you about what Trace mentioned, that a female shooter is extremely rare. Stats-wise, that's pretty accurate.
It is. It's rare that we see a female shooter in these types of situations. Last year, for example, there were 28 separate active shooter incidents in the U.S. All of them were carried out by males.
Now, if this is a domestic violence situation, which it may be, you handle it the same way as any active shooter. They had to go through all of those people exiting the building with their hands up and dealing to make sure that they weren't involved in some way.
Exactly. You know, the police did a great job in this situation. They were on scene in just 2 minutes, which is incredibly quick. But you still have this 200,000 square foot office space, all these employees. The police need to figure out, is there one shooter? Is it terrorism? Is it something else? Everybody has to be treated carefully. And as a subject, it's good to know what to do in these types of situations.
Yeah, and last thing, I mean, listening to that police chief there in San Bruno, not the biggest police department, but one that effectively, as you mentioned, got there very quickly. Your take on this is probably a domestic issue that is it targeting in some way or another?
Well, the investigation is going to tell more, but right now it looks like it's a domestic issue. But even so, you see multiple people were shot. These situations, it doesn't matter whether you're an innocent bystander, they can affect us all.
Of course. Yeah, and the security is key. John Iannarelli, we appreciate your time tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll stay tuned for any details out of California as we follow that breaking news there. A lot of news here in Washington, political news. We start at the White House, where they're in increasing bluster from President Trump about a caravan of around 1,000 to 1,500 immigrants from Central America, the group traveling through Mexico toward the U.S. border, and the president says it must be stopped. He's considering using the U.S. military, he says, along the southern border to do it. This occurs as new concerns grow about U.S. troop commitment in Syria and possible trade war with China. Chief White House correspondent John Roberts starts us off tonight from the North Lawn on the Politics News. John?
Well, good evening to you. President Trump still insists that the best way to secure our southern border is with a massive wall. But in the absence of a wall, President Trump today floated another controversial idea.
Okay, thank you very much.
President Trump today gave no details or would say if U.S. troops would be involved. The meeting with Baltic leaders today, he revealed he wants the U.S. military guarding the southern border.
Been speaking with General Mattis. We're going to be doing things militarily. Until we can have a wall and proper security, we're going to be guarding our border with the military. That's a big step. We really haven't done that before.
Officials say the White House counsel's office has been looking into the legal aspects of putting the military along the border. The National Guard has been used several times to assist the Border Patrol, and in the early 90s, a military joint task force was on the border for counter-narcotics and counter-terrorism. While a plan has yet to be formulated, just the idea drew a sharp response from former Mexican President Vicente Fox, who tweeted, "Demilitarize the southern border is to provoke more hate and distance even further our nations. Somebody has to talk some sense into him. He's elevating his hate toward Mexico, causing a greater conflict." President Trump claimed victory today in his public pressure Twitter campaign to have Mexico stop the caravan of Central American migrants traveling to the U.S. border. The president had gone so far as to threaten NAFTA if Mexico didn't do something.
I told Mexico very strongly, you're going to have to do something about these caravans, and they have to do it. Otherwise, I'm not going to do the NAFTA deal. NAFTA's been fantastic for Mexico, bad for us.
The group that organized the caravan, Pueblos Sin Fronteras, People Without Borders, criticized the president for demonizing an annual event they claim is a humanitarian mission.
Migrants should not be abandoned because of some tweets and political hate. It's very characteristic of Donald Trump to govern via tweets.
While President Trump is seeking an expanded role for the military in defending the border, he is looking at shrinking the U.S. profile in Syria.
It's time. It's time. We were very successful against ISIS. We'll be successful against anybody militarily. But sometimes it's time to come back home. And we're thinking about that very seriously. Okay?
But even the president's own advisors say the U.S. needs to stay in Syria for the foreseeable future.
We're in Syria to fight ISIS. That is our mission, and that mission isn't over, and we're going to complete that mission.
Experts worry a U.S. pullout could lead to a resurgence of ISIS and remove a counterweight to Russian influence in Syria. Today, President Trump asked about his relationship with Vladimir Putin, whether he saw him as an enemy or friend.
I think I could have a very good relationship with Russia and with President Putin, and if I did, that would be a great thing, and there's also a great possibility that that won't happen. Who knows?
And the president dismissed the notion he isn't tough on Russia, pointing to his recent order to expel 60 Russian diplomats in the U.S.
So there are many things that I've done, and not only the 60 diplomats. Germany did 4, France did 4, we did 60. There's nobody been tougher on Russia.
On whether U.S. troops should stay in Syria, President Trump today revealed that in his March 20th meetings with the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, President Trump told Salman if Saudi Arabia wants U.S. troops to stay in Syria to stabilize the situation, well, maybe they should pick up the tab. Bret?
How that would work is really the question. John, thank you. The possibility of increased economic hostilities with China is making for considerable consternation in boardrooms of the country's biggest companies. President Trump saying today it's not his fault, but he's going to fix it.
We have a problem with China. They've created a trade deficit, and I really blame our representatives and, frankly, our preceding presidents for this.
Well, if you take a look at the markets today, a big rebound. The Dow up 389, the S&P 500 up 32, the NASDAQ up a little bit more than 71. It's been a wild ride on Wall Street. Deirdre Bolton of Fox Business Network joins us from New York with that story about China, the tariffs. A lot of news from the business world, Deirdre.
There certainly is, Bret, and we did see China retaliate on the tariffs that we put on aluminum and steel. But the Chinese chose the tariffs on our products pretty carefully. So they chose American fruit, they chose frozen pork, and they chose products that are not really a punch to the gut, as some strategists tell me. So they had to make a move to save face, which is, many people have told me, many China hands, important to them culturally. But it's about a $3 billion response, and as you know, Bret, we are aiming for between a $50 and $60 billion. So there are a lot of investors who are saying, look, we don't know just how protectionist this president will be, and that is part of what puts pressure on the markets the days that we see it lower. As for President Trump, he is also feuding, no other way to say it, via Twitter with either Amazon as a company, the founder Jeff Bezos, or the Washington Post, with which Jeff Bezos owns personally. Now, there is no interaction between the Washington Post and Amazon, the e-commerce company, but President Trump has tweeted 5 times in just 1 week about Amazon and about various parts of its business, even calling the USPS, the United States Postal Service, a delivery boy for Amazon, and implying that Amazon gets bigger breaks than it deserves. Most strategists that I've been speaking with say, okay, listen, Amazon has not done anything wrong from a tax perspective. They say the company has been around for 2 decades. It provides cheap goods in a convenient way, hasn't broken the law. They are still longtime buyers. But I would be remiss if I didn't say that since the president started tweeting about Amazon about a week ago, the stock lost about 10%, which represents about, well, 12 billion to 16 billion, depending on the day, for Jeff Bezos personally. But, Bret, you do not need to feel sorry for him. He is still the world's richest man. His personal net worth is still northwards of about $100 billion. I wanted to mention, too, Chamber of Commerce backing up more or less Amazon. And, in fact, the executive VP, so this is the largest business group in the States, criticizing attacks by government officials, so they did not name the president particularly, against American companies, saying it is inappropriate for government officials to use their position to attack an American company. So with that, we have to read in the situation between President Trump, his tweets, and Amazon. The share did close higher today, up 17% still year to date. Bret.
Okay. Deirdre, thank you. More on this with the panel. President Trump seems to have the back of embattled Environmental Protection Agency Chief Scott Pruitt, at least for the time being. The president gave Pruitt a pep talk during a phone conversation yesterday, but sources tell us there are still concerns about recent negative headlines. In other words, that does not mean Pruitt will escape the growing scrutiny over some questionable expenses. Correspondent Doug McElway looks at the situation tonight.
Scott Pruitt, sir? You support Scott Pruitt?
I hope he's going to be great.
A tepid endorsement in the future tense for President Trump's besieged EPA administrator, Scott Pruitt, as he faces several new accusations. Today, 2 Democratic congressmen wrote EPA's Inspector General, requesting an investigation into Pruitt's reported sweetheart deal on this Capitol Hill condo owned by energy lobbyists. Their letter says, quote, EPA approved the pipeline expansion plan of a Canadian energy company who employed Mr. Hart as a lobbyist. At the same time, Mr. Pruitt was leasing the condo at a below-market rate. An EPA ethics opinion written after the rental found Pruitt's $1,500 monthly rent was a reasonable rate. But questions remain whether Pruitt paid only for the nights he stayed in the condo in an apparent Airbnb-style arrangement. All this after Pruitt faced scrutiny for other alleged misdeeds, his pattern of first-class air travel, allegedly to enhance security. A private jet was rejected because of its $100,000 monthly cost. Published reports also found Pruitt's round-the-clock personal security detail required triple the staffing of previous administrators. And last September, the Washington Post found the EPA was spending nearly $25,000 to build a secure, soundproof booth in Pruitt's office. Now, even some Republicans are joining the Dump Pruitt chorus. Representative Carlos Curbelo tweeted that EPA administrator should resign or President Trump should dismiss him.
Right now, Pruitt is a marked man in Washington.
Pruitt's supporters, though, say the barrage of attacks is a testament to his effectiveness.
Scott Pruitt has been a lightning rod. He has been the incarnation of evil for environmental groups and climate activists. So they're doing everything they can to go after him.
Pruitt ignored shouted questions at a ceremony today, marking his latest affront to environmentalists, rolling back President Obama's plan to increase average fuel economy standards to 54.5 miles per gallon by the year 2025. Had the standards remained in effect, massive changes would have hit car manufacturing and the vehicles motorists buy.
It statutorily kills the American SUV as we know it.
A federal lawsuit will likely be needed to resolve the federal-state dispute. It could take years and leave automakers in limbo. What automobile manufacturers most want out of any new fuel economy standards is consistency and predictability so they can make long-term plans. Not an easy thing to do when Washington and state policymakers are this polarized. Brett?
Doug, thank you. Up next, West Virginia Republicans in a 3-way fight to get a shot at a vulnerable Democratic senator in the fall. We'll take you to that story, and we're following the latest from the YouTube headquarters shooting out in California. We'll bring you any breaking news from there.
At 12:46 p.m. this afternoon, San Bruno Police Department received numerous 911 calls regarding gunshots at the YouTube campus located on Cherry Avenue in our city. San Bruno Police arrived on scene at 12:48 and immediately began a search for a possible shooter or suspect. Upon arrival, officers encountered numerous employees fleeing from the building. It was very chaotic, as you can imagine. We did encounter one victim with an apparent gunshot wound towards the front of the business as we arrived. Several minutes later, while conducting a search of the premises, officers located a second individual with a gunshot wound that appears to may have been self-inflicted.
Welcome back. A few overseas headlines now. Saudi Arabia's crown prince here in the U.S. says Israel has the right to have its own land. It's a major break from other leaders in the Arab world, at least publicly. Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman is blasting the Iranian supreme leader also, Ali Khamenei, the crown prince calling him the Hitler of the Middle East. And the crown prince also supporting President Trump's opposition to the Iran nuclear deal, as we've heard him say before. A Russian company will build a $20 billion nuclear power plant in Turkey. That announcement comes as Russian President Vladimir Putin visits his Turkish counterpart, Erdogan. Turkey and Russia are setting aside traditional rivalries and differences on regional issues to form closer ties, both say. This is also ahead of a meeting with those two leaders as well as the president of Iran. Russian President Putin says Russia wants a thorough inquiry into the poisoning of a former Kremlin spy in Great Britain. British officials have accused Russia of being behind that attack. The U.S. and many other nations have joined Great Britain in expelling Russian diplomats over that case. Russian officials and the President, Putin, have steadfastly denied involvement. And in Malaysia, the parliament there has passed a law prohibiting fake news. Supporters have accused the opposition coalition of using fake news to win votes. Critics of the measures say it will be used to silence dissent ahead of a general election. Other Southeast Asian countries, including Singapore and the Philippines, have also proposed laws to restrict fake news. Back here at home, Republicans are hoping to pick up a U.S. Senate seat this fall in West Virginia, where President Trump won easily in 2016. But the GOP primary there might not produce the most electable opponent against Democrat incumbent Joe Manchin. Peter Ducey has the story tonight from Charleston, West Virginia.
The race to replace one of the most vulnerable Democrats in the country has been upended by a primary candidate with a probation officer. That candidate with a criminal record is Don Blankenship. The former CEO of the Massey Energy Company is well known in West Virginia for, among other things, a conviction on a misdemeanor charge of conspiring to violate federal mine safety standards following an explosion at the Upper Big Branch mine that killed 29. Now he thinks the time locked up gives him a leg up.
That was a walking point for the coal industry in West Virginia, and in fact for West Virginia conservative politics, and it probably doesn't surprise them that much that Obama and his people would come after me, and they did.
Blankenship makes the May 8th primary a three-way contest with Congressman Evan Jenkins and the state's Attorney General Patrick Morrisey. The winner faces incumbent Democratic Senator Joe Manchin, who declined to be interviewed for this story, in a state President Trump won by 42 percentage points in 2016, inspiring the Governor Jim Justice to jump ship from the Democratic Party.
I will be changing my registration to Republican.
Now Morrisey, the AG, is trying to discredit one of his opponents for his past affiliation as a Democrat.
I think Evan Jenkins is a liberal.
Jenkins, the congressman, is using Morrisey's past history in the Garden State against him.
And the other candidate is a person who ran for Congress in the year 2000 on a theme that he was Jersey through and through.
But they're alike in that they put a premium on portraying a proximity to the president.
We work closely with the White House and the agencies to roll back some of those egregious, those burdensome regulations.
I'm the only candidate who actually has an established working relationship with the president.
As for Blankenship, he's hyping his status as a political newcomer. He insists this campaign is not an attempt to get even with Manchin, who was governor during the Upper Big Branch disaster, and later said Blankenship had blood on his hands.
Senator Manchin needs to be defeated for the sake of West Virginians, not for revenge.
The day after tomorrow, President Trump is coming to West Virginia for a round table about jobs. Attorney General Morrisey and Congressman Jenkins have both been invited in their official capacities. We don't know if an endorsement is imminent, but Jenkins tells me any kind words from the commander-in-chief would be a big boost. Bret?
Peter Ducey in Charleston, West Virginia. Peter, thanks. Up next, an update from YouTube headquarters on today's shooting there, plus the first sentencing in a case brought by the special counsel in the Russia collusion investigation. Keep it here. Our top story at the bottom of the hour, shots fired at the YouTube headquarters in San Bruno, California. Police briefed reporters a short time ago saying there are 4 injured and 1 female fatality from what is believed to be a self-inflicted wound. She is believed to have been the shooter of that incident. Correspondent Claudia Cowan is at the scene right now, just arrived. Good evening, Claudia. What are we learning?
Good evening to you, Bret. Well, officials say the immediate threat has passed, but just a horrific scene and multiple victims after a shooter opened fire here at YouTube headquarters in San Bruno. And 3 hours later, there is still a lot of police activity here. By some accounts, this happened at an employee gathering inside this massive glass facility that you see. And it's possible this shooting may have been the result of a domestic dispute. Now, police have not confirmed that, but according to witness reports, a woman shot her boyfriend inside the building and then turned the gun on herself. Again, that has not been confirmed, but here's what police had to say just a little while ago. Listen.
I want to clarify that we did locate a victim with what we believe to be a self-inflicted gunshot wound. It's a female, but the investigation is still ongoing before we can put all the pieces together.
Police say they believe she is the shooter, but they are still clearing nearby businesses to make sure the area is safe. Now, authorities say they started getting some 911 calls about an active shooter right around 12:45 local time, and there was a massive response by police as well as ambulances and other first responders. Witnesses say they heard several bursts of rapid gunfire, including reports that one victim was shot as many as 10 times. Now, police say 4 victims were transported to area hospitals. Both San Francisco Francisco General to the north and Stanford University to the south. It is not clear whether these victims were shot or suffered other kinds of injuries, just trying to get out of the way. But one man, we're told, is listed in critical condition. And in the meantime, police are continuing to interview employees here and eyewitnesses. Of course, they are combing this facility for all kinds of evidence. The YouTube, I should mention, is the area's largest employer. It's a 200,000 square foot facility with some 1,700 workers. It is unclear, Bret, when these workers will be able to return to work. The investigation continues, of course, and police say they will have further updates throughout the night. We'll bring those to you here on Fox News. Bret?
Claudia Kahn live on scene. Thank you. Back to other news. A lawyer with ties to former Trump campaign chairman Paul Manafort is headed for prison. Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge is live tonight with a landmark decision in the Russia Special Counsel investigation. Good evening, Catherine.
Well, thank you, Brett. This morning, 33-year-old Alex Vanderswan entered federal court here in Washington, D.C., where he was sentenced for lying to federal investigators. That carries a maximum penalty of 5 years in prison. But instead, the London-based attorney, whose father-in-law is a Russian oligarch with ties to President Putin, got 30 days in prison, a $20,000 fine, and 2 months of supervised release. The Dutch lawyer worked with Rick Gates, the former business partner of Paul Manafort. Gates is now cooperating with special counsel investigators. Mr. Vanderswan also worked with Manafort, who was briefly the Trump campaign chairman and now faces money laundering and tax fraud charges. Based on court filings, special counsel investigators are exploring contacts between the three men and a suspected operative for Russian intelligence. A newly public memo for the first time explains the broad authorities that allow the special counsel to investigate events prior to the 2016 campaign. The 4-page memo was drafted by Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein in August 2017. With entire sections blacked out, what's visible shows Rosenstein gave Mueller the power to go beyond allegations of Russian collusion to Manafort's work in the Ukraine and allegations that he, quote, committed a crime or crimes arising out of payments he received from the Ukrainian government before and during the tenure of President Viktor Yanukovych. In a separate development today, the wife of fired FBI Director Andrew McCabe went on the record calling last year a nightmare for her family. Writing in the Washington Post, Dr. Jill McCabe, who ran unsuccessfully for a Virginia State Senate seat in 2015, said her husband did not campaign for her despite this widely circulated photo she said was meant for family and friends. Dr. McCabe also said the FBI ethics panel concluded there was no conflict for her husband when she received more than $600,000 from Democrats, including a longtime Clinton ally, because her husband's involvement in the Clinton email case came after the contributions were made and the race was over. Quote, I have spent countless hours trying to understand how the president and so many others can share such destructive lies about me. I want people to know that the whole story that everything is based on is just false and utterly absurd. But bureau critics say the ethics findings were wrong and indicate a culture problem among senior FBI executives. Bret.
All right, Catherine, thank you.
You're welcome.
The federal government is for the first time publicly acknowledging foreign spies and criminals may be using surveillance devices to track individual cell phones and intercept calls and messages here in Washington, D.C. The Associated Press cites a letter from the Homeland Security Department to Oregon Democrat Senator Ron Wyden. The letter suggests little has been done about the threat posed from these devices known as stingrays. U.S. intelligence and law enforcement have been using the equipment for years. 17 states, 6 cities, and the District of Columbia are all suing the federal government over its intention to put a citizenship question in the 2020 census. The lawsuit says the question will undermine the accuracy of the population count. There's also a separate but similar lawsuit being brought by California and several other states. President Trump says he may send the U.S. military to the Mexican border and withdraw American military personnel from Syria. We'll get reaction from the panel when we come back.
I've been speaking with General Mattis. We're going to be doing things militarily. Until we can have a wall and proper security, we're going to be guarding our border with the military. We have horrible, horrible and very unsafe laws in the United States. Hopefully soon, hopefully Congress will get their act together and get in and create some very powerful laws like Mexico has and like Canada has and like almost all countries have. We don't have laws. We have catch and release. We will be doing things with Mexico, and they have to do it. Otherwise, I'm not going to do the NAFTA deal.
Well, the president talking about immigration, talking about NAFTA, talking about how he's going to shore up the southern border with the U.S. military. Now the Mexican ambassador to the U.S., who we had on special report last night, is asking for an official clarification from the U.S. government on exactly what's going to happen. Let's bring in our panel and start there. Matthew Continetti, editor-in-chief of the Washington Free Beacon. Mara Liasson, national political correspondent of National Public Radio, and Katie Pavlich, news editor at townhall.com. Okay, Mara, the president was on a tear, tweeting and talking, both in the news conference and at the cabinet room, a lot about the U.S. military along the border.
Yep. And this is a dramatic, tough action that he can send a message. Yes, I'm doing something about illegal immigration, even though I couldn't get funding for my wall in the omnibus. That's the context for this. He's very frustrated about that, and he's gotten some pushback from the base because of that. This has been done before. George W. Bush and Barack Obama used the National Guard to supplement Border Patrol agents when there was a big surge of illegal immigrants coming over the border. Whether there is one now or not, we don't know. And we don't know exactly what the president means when he says we're going to have the military on the border, but that's something that he was meeting with General Mattis about, and the defense secretary, and they're going to figure it out.
Okay.
Well, I would say it's not just about illegal immigration on the border. It's about deterrence with cartel and violent operations that are happening there as well. Now, this will probably be welcomed by the governors of Arizona and Texas. It will not be welcomed by the governor of California, to be sure. But this does go hand in hand with the administration's talking points and push this week to end catch and release. And to me, the president announcing he wants the military on the border, we don't know for exactly how long that's going to be. He says he wants it to be until the wall is built, but considering George W. Bush had the National Guard there for 2 years, President Obama had them there for about a year and 3 months, it might not be for as long as it takes to build the wall, because that will take longer probably than his presidency. But he's clearly sending a message of deterrence by putting the military there when he's talking about preventing people from coming here, because our own immigration laws allow people who get here from certain countries, the majority of them, to stay, and it becomes more of a problem for our legal system than it does in terms of border security.
And he talked about that today too, Matthew, about the fact that these folks come in, they seek asylum, and essentially the court system is overwhelmed. 700 days is the average now to get from the point of the border to an actual hearing.
You could make an argument that immigration politics got Donald Trump the Republican nomination and helped him win the presidency. So this is a natural issue for him. You know, when he was inaugurated president, illegal border traffic dropped precipitously. It's now been slowly climbing back up. And so I think Katie is right. A lot of these moves are to reestablish the deterrence, to say that we're going to police this border. There are legislative restrictions on what the military can do once they're dispatched there, and they typically serve an advisory role, a logistical role, to free up the actual border patrol. And all of this is happening at the same time, Bret, that Trump is exploring ways that the Department of Defense can help fund the wall, which is the main object here, I think.
Right, and, you know, funding is the big question. Meantime, talking about the Syria situation, asked a question about U.S. troops in Syria.
It's time. We were very successful against ISIS. We'll be successful against anybody militarily. But sometimes it's time to come back home. I want to get out. I want to bring our troops back home. I want to start rebuilding our nation. We'll be consulting also with groups of our people and groups of our allies. Saudi Arabia is very interested in our decision. And I said, well, you know, you want us to say maybe you're going to have to pay.
Maybe I have to pay. Saudi Arabia or Gulf states. Meantime, at the same time, almost the exact same time, the U.S. counter-ISIS envoy, Brett McGurk, was saying this to reporters.
We are in Syria to fight ISIS. That is our mission, and that mission isn't over, and we're going to complete that mission.
So, you know, obviously the president is laying groundwork here for pulling out of that operation, but when it's done is really the question.
Right, when it's done, and if he pulls out too soon, does he create a vacuum that's filled by Russia and Iran and gives ISIS a chance to regroup? This is exactly what he ran against when he criticized Barack Obama for putting a date certain on pulling troops out of Iraq. He said the bad guys are just going to wait you out. And that's why you have a lot of military experts saying this is not a good idea. As much as Donald Trump's deepest instincts are, come home, use that money to rebuild our nation, he's kind of a hawkish non-interventionist, if there is such a thing. But this is going to be tough for him to figure out how to do this.
But think about that soundbite we just listened to, Katie, and his new incoming national security advisor, John Bolton, and how those two things track. It's obviously the president who makes policy. Bolton would be an advisor, but clearly he would think otherwise.
Yeah, I mean, giving an end date without an actual timestamp is counter to what the administration has said that they're going to do. And you're absolutely right about John Bolton coming in as a national security advisor. It's going to be very interesting to see how getting out of Syria, no matter when that is, couples with the administration's new plan on Iran. When the president released his national security strategy, Iran was the main focus. Iran was the main focus under General McMaster. It is still the main focus. It is interesting to see him talking about the Saudis, however. He understands that the Saudis have a vested interest in making sure that that part of the region is stabilized. And he said all along, other countries who have an interest there need to step up. The Saudis seem like in the last couple of months they're willing to do that. But if they're going to continue to be tough on Iran, as they've laid out in their strategies before, taking Syria out of the picture is going to be very, very difficult.
Finally, I want to just touch on this other issue, and that is Amazon, where the president has really stepped up the attacks. Tickle us.
You take a look at the post office, and the post office is losing billions of dollars, and the taxpayers are paying for that money because it delivers packages for Amazon at a very below cost. And that's not fair to the United States. It's not fair to our taxpayers. And Amazon has the money to pay the fair rate at the post office, which would be much more than they're paying right now. So Amazon is going to have to pay much more money to the post office.
So, Matthew, this is kind of, well, it is unprecedented for a president to go after one company with tweets and statements. The post office doesn't operate on taxpayer money. It's a pay-for service. They obviously operate in buildings and facilities that they don't have to pay taxes on. But what about how the president's describing all of this?
Amazon and the post office do have some type of special contract which no one really knows the details of. And I do notice, as a frequent buyer of books, both from Amazon proper and from used bookstores that retail on Amazon, I find the Amazon packages get there much more quickly than the ones that have to go through the regular post office channel. Let's say Donald Trump is a populist figure.
Oh, that's interesting. We're going to do a study there.
It's one anecdotal piece of evidence, Bret, from a bibliophile. Trump is, people tend to view this in terms of Trump's relationship with Amazon's CEO, Jeff Bezos. But I think one stream of communication he's getting is from all of his people in the commercial real estate business and industry who have been really hard hit by the changing nature of the retail economy. Donald Trump tends to think in terms of tangible objects. And so I think what's bothering him here, among many other things, is a sense that our economy is shifting in a way that his friends who deal in small retail businesses or commercial property like malls are losing out to this major internet giant.
Let's just say if he woke up tomorrow and said, you know, Walmart's taking out mom and pop stores too.
Look, there's two things going on. One is there's a lot of retail in Trump towers around the country, and he's probably suffering along with everybody else. But this idea that the President of the United States would go after a individual company, why isn't the Chamber of Commerce having its hair on fire? Okay, but why isn't the entire Republican Party, who is absolutely
President
against
Obama went after Koch Industries pretty specific. It's not totally unprecedented for a president to go after a private company.
No, but that was egregious, and it was rightly called out. This is absolutely anathema to everything that I knew about free market conservatism.
Last word.
And keep in mind that there were government workers who negotiated this contract. So what is the status of their responsibility for Amazon getting the supposed deal that the president is talking about?
We don't even know if they got a deal.
Yeah, we don't know what the deal is. All we know is that something's happening.
By law, the post office has to charge to cover its costs. I don't think the post office is allowed to give a coverage deal to anybody.
Well, we all know that the government doesn't always follow the rules, so we'll just have to see if we get that contract.
And we're going to order several books from different places. Next up, the president says he has EPA Chief Scott Pruitt's back. Sort of, did he? Stay with us.
Scott Pruitt, sir? Do you support Scott Pruitt?
I hope he's going to be great.
Well, it's a time of hope and optimism. It's driving the economy across the country as well, and largely because of the decisions that we're making in the executive branch to get back to common sense regulations.
Well, Scott Pruitt, under fire, the EPA administrator, dealing with a number of scandals that have been covered and we've covered here on Special Report. The president asked specifically about that today and said, I hope he'll be good. Not exactly a ringing endorsement. Kimberly Strassel, our friend from the Wall Street Journal, says, however, this flap is absurd. Obama EPA officials spend as much or more on travel, and career EPA ethics officials say he paid reasonable market value for the condo, and leaser had no business in front of the EPA. The press might at least try to pretend it didn't have two standards. Talking about $50 a night here in Washington, a place owned, Katie, by a lobbyist. Yeah. Your thoughts on this? I mean, it was not a ringing endorsement from the president today.
Not. I hope he will be great. It wasn't. He is great. He's been great. I like the work he's doing for the administration. He's making sure that our regulatory agenda is being pushed through, that we're allowing the coal industry to come back as a result of them taking the regulation. He's doing those things, but the president didn't talk about the great successes that Scott Pruitt has had. The interesting part about today and the information that came out about Scott Pruitt was the number of sources in different media outlets who had different stories. There are 5 different stories on 5 different ethics issues today in a number of different publications. So the question is, who's doing it? Who's out to get him? Yeah. And the president seems to allow some of his cabinet members to get away with a few things until they become a distraction. And when you have an inspector general report about your taxpayer spending, you become a distraction and people start asking about it, and the president has little patience for that.
Yep, I haven't talked to a single person at the White House who would not put money on the fact that he is on thin ice and will be gone soon. Now, to stipulate, the president's personnel decisions are always unpredictable, but there is a sense that there's just one too many ethics problems. And look, Donald Trump's brand was draining the swamp. He doesn't like it when somebody is acting like they're repopulating the swamp instead of draining it, and that's the problem here.
However, on the flip side, Pruitt, arguably, as far as cabinet secretaries have done, has ticked off the Trump agenda and reversed the Obama agenda when it comes to the EPA more than any other cabinet secretary.
When you look at the personnel Trump has dismissed, usually it's because there's some type of policy disagreement, right? That played a role in Secretary Tillerson and Secretary Shulkin, or there's some type of policy and personality mix, right? So they might get along with Tillerson. In Price's case, Tom Price's case, he failed to get the Obamacare repeal through. You don't really have that with Scott Pruitt. It seems that he's been one of the more effective members of the Trump cabinet to date. And there doesn't seem to be any personality conflict, at least what we know about. What there are these mounting reports of conflicts of interest. So Trump is going to have to balance that out. You have a very loyal and effective soldier versus someone who's getting increasingly bad press.
And a couple of Republicans. Representative Carlos Curbelo tweeting about Pruitt, major policy differences aside, Pruitt's corruption scandals are an embarrassment to the administration. His conduct grossly disrespectful to American taxpayers. Time for him to resign or for POTUS to dismiss him. Ileana Ross-Layton, and also from Florida, agreeing with her other congressman there from Florida. So we shall see. We'll see where the president comes down. Panel, thank you very much. When we come back, our Masters Week Kickers Part 2. Finally, tonight, sometimes the anchor has kicker discretion. All right, most times. But this week is Masters Week, and tonight is the Champions Dinner at Augusta National. 2017 Masters champion Sergio Garcia gets to choose the menu for the big dinner. Only one way to be invited to that dinner, and that is to actually win the Masters. Each year, fans get to see what the menu is going to be before the dinner tonight, designed by the defending champion. Garcia stayed true to his roots with a Spanish-themed meal, but one of the standout items is the salad, which features an ingredient from all 10 countries that have had golfers win the Masters. The champions will also be having Spanish lobster rice and tres leches cake from Garcia's wife, Angela. While golf fans attending the Masters won't get such an extravagant meal, they will